Loading. All right, here we are. How are you doing, my friend? All good?
All good, thank you.
All good?
Oh,
Okay, fantastic. The one thing that bothers me about we are saying retrieve, but we're passing a parameter, and I have this kind of pet peeve against, saying or doing a verb that doesn't imply pushing something specifically, but in reality, you're really not pushing anything, or you're posting a query of some kind, right? Omar, I'm assuming the screen is visible to you.
it is.
Yeah, okay. So here's also one nice thing that I discovered. So okay, now I told you I have this 57-inch Odyssey monitor, right? So instead of changing the resolution to 175 or anything crazy like that, I am just minimizing the window itself. So it looks like the how do I explain this? Like the screen, it's like look how Visual Studio looks on my screen right now. It's really contained. It's not across the screen. Do you see it?
Yeah.
So so now I think the res will be much better. I
Like
don't know.
the left side is good, like the code, but the solution explorer is very small. Like
I wonder if it gets bigger if I make it
which
even smaller. Yeah, look, it's getting bigger. Do you see?
yeah. Yeah.
How about now?
Yeah,
And I can
much better. Is it
hang on.
comfortable to you?
It's absolutely fine to me.
Yeah.
I can write code anywhere. So if I do it like this, how about now? Is it a little bit more balanced
It
like
is
this?
balanced, correct. Yeah.
All right, let's do this. So where were we really? I passed the baton to Kailu, and he basically made a failing test pass. I don't know if he wrote. Yeah, so that's Omar. Omar, basically did a quick code drop. He changed the data result to avoid namespace. Oh, nice. Okay, now what I wonder if everything is building nicely. Let's do that. Everything builds nicely. Let me run all the tests. This was from last time. Yeah, I think this will be much more visible for people on their phones and stuff like that. Yeah, cool. No, to me, from my perspective, whether it's comfortable, I mean, at this point, it's the same as like a 32-inch screen. Just that little box, so it should be super visible. Should be super visible. Okay, my friend, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna write a little test in here, and this test will basically focus on um, validating the incoming input query, and we're basically validating whether it's null, empty, or white space. So we're just gonna throw invalid query or invalid query data processing exception, something like that. So let me just go into our processing services.
Quick question,
And
Hassan. Like,
go
since
ahead.
this is a pass-through service,
Hmm.
do we need to handle, like, to wrap all other exceptions to localize them and, any exception that's coming from foundation?
No, no, no. We unwrap them. We basically take away the outside cover
Yeah,
of
and
these
take the inner.
exceptions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just keep the inner going forward, right? Because at the end of the day, what really happens, well, the originator of the exception is the one making the determination what the destiny of that exception is going to be, right? So
Mm.
let me kind of explain. And you did bring up we need a little bit more documentation on the exceptions and whatnot. I agree with you 100%. But let me just for the people at kind of watching. Okay, Greg says it's good on Android. Perfect. Let's do this. So if I go back here, all right. So check this out. You have this foundation service, right? And you have a processing service and maybe even an orchestration service, right? Sitting right here. And this is assume that this orchestration service is talking to something else in here. So here's your situation. So this is a foundation service, and this is a processing service, and this is maybe an orchestration service, right? This is the natural gradual thing, progression of things, right? Higher order business logic. If this guy is throwing a invalid data exception like this, then naturally it will wrap this up in data validation exception, right? Of course, someone in the community will say, well, invalid data exception could be a localized external. Don't think that far yet. It's okay to say, let's just assume for the purpose of this discussion that this invalid data exception was locally initiated, meaning that it's not something that you called that told you that this thing is invalid. It's a structural or logical validation that you've done on spot, and you discovered that the input is invalid. So you're putting that in a data validation exception. Watch this. Watch in the naming convention, I intentionally made it so that in the local exception, the entity name is internal, like in the middle of the sentence, because it's obvious from the context that you are in the data realm, right? But for the external exception, it has to start with the entity first. And this is like a subtle thing that tells you whether the exception that you're reading, like as soon as you see that exception in your logs, you can immediately tell this is inner, outer, is this at the foundation level? Is this a dependency issue? It tells you everything just by reading the name of the exception, right? Now, the exception that's carrying this is moving over here to the processing service. So obviously, what the processing service is going to do, it's going to create, watch this, it's going to take that exception in here, and it's going to create a data processing, data dependency validation exception. So think of it as a pointer. It's basically going and saying, here's a pointer, right? And this pointer says that your service, let me just bring that guy up here. Your service is basically not the initiator. When you say dependency validation, it's basically saying I am not the initiator of this exception, but it will take this guy forward. So it unwraps, it throws this guy away and unwraps this guy and basically takes this guy forward as its inner. Sometimes in some places you will see a situation where you you need to even morph that local exception into something else, but that's advanced standard implementation. Like that's very, very rare cases.
That's good actually. But do you call this data dependency or data processing dependency validation
Yes,
exception?
processing. Yeah, you're right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's a
So,
carrier of
yeah,
the original exception.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Now, why is that important? Because at the very top, look at the exposure layer. This thing is very sneaky this way because watch this. At the very top, if this is some exposure or exposure layer of any kind, this guy will always look at these. It will always go and look at these guys here and say,
Mhm.
hey, what's your inner? It doesn't matter how many services, like imagine you put an orchestration and a coordination service and a management service and an Uber management service. It doesn't matter because the exception keeps traveling into that direction. Now, Kailu here might tell you we've seen situations where you still, if you're doing a structural logical validation at a higher level, you still have to handle those, but they look really cute. I don't know if I ever showed you let me show you. If you have a controller and you're trying to handle an exception, we basically go and do something like this. Watch this. If I have a, let's just for all intents and purposes, let's say we have an exception. You basically go like this and say private void foo, right? Try catch, and then you basically go and say, um, uh, exception. Um, Here's your exception. And then we get to do that nonsense when, right, exception, the inner exception is invalid cast exception, or watch this, or, right, invalid whatever exception, or invalid time exception, or, and we can go like that forever. And that's why your exposure layer look like, right? Now, someone might say, well, you must have a million questions right now. You must be saying, wait a second, well, if you're handling all of these inner exceptions, are you truly achieving abstraction, right? Like, why does your controller, your exposure layer knows about, the lower level services and not just know about its first point of contact, which is, I mean, it does in the sense that it's catching really something orchestration exception, right? It does know about it this way. But also, if we decide and determine that all of these exceptions are worthy or qualify to be a bad request or qualify to be a a dependency server error or 429 or 502, whatever we decide it to be, then we are strictly saying that these exceptions will be translated into these particular codes. One of the folks that have been kind of researching this idea, they basically went and said, why don't you just inherit? They will tell you this, inherit a generic exception model, and then just have your controller render that inherited exception this way. It's great on paper until you start realizing, wait a second, not every one of these exceptions will always be handled the same way at the exposure layer. In addition to the fact that it creates coupling and entanglement, sometimes some exceptions will be rendered much more differently in some cases versus others, right? Like for instance, sometimes you want to communicate, you want to be intentionally vague and say bad request. In other places, you want to be very specific for internal APIs for the very same exception, and you're going to communicate a little bit more sophisticated error code, right? So what do you do then? See, when you take things at scale and enterprise, all of these theories just fall apart. You start seeing, wait a second, it's not always going to be this way. And then engineers, they face this problem of, well, that's the pattern and the standard that I was following, but it doesn't scale. So they kind of, it's like they bought an electric car in the middle of the desert and they're just stuck there in the middle of nowhere, right? And they don't know what to do or where to go, right? So that's basically what happens. Go ahead. You had a couple of comments, I'm pretty sure.
Actually, you just raised a more interesting point here, like in the
Uh-huh.
exposure layer when we need to know about what's happening one level after the last point of contact.
Mm-hmm.
Can't we just say that the last service, what can't be orchestration or management, whatever, like last service that the exposer touches needs to handle its exceptions differently so that the exposers have only access to that last service exception and it has all the information we need.
That's great. Also on paper until you start realizing that this last point of contact service is contacting an exposer directly in one instance and calling an even higher order business logic service in another instance. So your processing service, if it's the one talking to the controller, right, it will be talking to the controller in one flow, but it's also talking to an orchestration service upstream in another flow.
Yeah.
What do you think? Does this apply? I mean, you're not wrong. You could very much so convince me that if this is your foundation service and this is your processing, and yeah, you do have an exposure or a controller in here, but also at the same time, there's an orchestration service that's sitting here talking to this guy. And this is a very true statement. Usually I develop them this way. So if you have another, never put two categories of services like this, especially from a design standpoint. Never put two different categories at the same level. So you see how I'm doing it? Like there is an exposure layer in here. This is a controller like that.
I
Oh,
don't
sorry, I'm
see
not
your
sharing my
screen.
screen.
Yeah.
Yep, sorry. I got too excited and I jumped over there.
Yeah.
So you see how I'm doing this? So this is an orchestration service like this, and here's a controller, right? And you have two processing services and two foundation services. So you know that this is a shared resource. It's shared between two different layers. So this guy has to always act in an abstract way.
But wait, the controller doesn't call processing in this case. It should call orchestration, right?
No, not at all. Like if let me give you an example. You have student processing service, right? And this is a student controller like that. But you also have something completely different called library orchestration service. And this library needs the student against the library processing service. So your exposure layer in this realm for CRUD operation is fine, but it
Mhm.
needs to be like you will see another controller sitting up in here called student library controller, right? And that's totally legit standard compliant design, because you're basically saying some of these will be exposed directly, some of them will have to go on orchestration service. You may also argue the pass-through logic. And this is where I just stay quiet. I'm basically fighting myself online. I'm basically saying, why don't you balance this or do a pass-through the
I was
same way you
going to
do,
say, yeah.
right? It is a valid argument, except that you're no longer part of the services realm. Once you talk to exposers, you're completely outside of this realm. You're not there anymore. So does it make sense to balance even outside of that realm? I don't know. Maybe, I don't know.
Sometimes I say things that sound crazy here because, like, I may misunderstood like few things, but it seems to me there is need to be at the very end after all the services that, because you said like a service might be calling some business logic on one end, but
Uh-huh.
uh, like if we introduce something, I don't know, call it exception unification service, that just its responsibility is to unify the exceptions for a controller, and the controller calls that. Uh,
That's what
it
these
is.
folks that that's what the middleware folks say. These folks that go and say, "Oh, write a middleware."
Hmm.
You're not far off. I'm genuinely having this conversation with you just to see how far we can take it. But and this is not a new conversation, but it certainly is an interesting one. Um, so the folks that call for middleware, they basically go and say, have a generic unified exception handling at the controller level and handle all exceptions that
Hmm.
adhere to a certain type with the same status code. Well, that's very problematic because first of all, you're creating entanglement. Second of all, not every exception will be reporting the exact same code. The same exception can report two different codes based on the context.
Yeah.
Please think more about this because you might be knocking the door of taking the standard to the next level, right? And there is the one thing about that. Look, I you are a principal software engineer. You are a big deal, but also I have to tell you, like most of the great ideas come from everybody, everywhere. And if you knock on that door and think about it, if you can bring enough logic and reason into changing certain piece in the standard is always in draft mode for a reason. I am more than happy to change how we handle things. Just be careful because you will always find yourself in the box where you're creating entanglements between models and then the system starts to fall apart, like the maintainability and sustainability of the system starts to fall apart, right? I know very well that 90% of the effort that goes into any service is mostly exception handling. And that's literally legit because the happy path is supposed to take 1% of the time. Other path, critical path, sad path, whatever you call it, is supposed to take most of the brain power. 100%.
It's a, yeah, very interesting problem. Yeah.
Okay, so by the way, Kylo, I think it's your turn. We need to handle null, empty, or white space. I was gonna do it, but you showed up. So you made the test pass, so it's your turn, right? To write a failing test. No?
Okay,
Cool.
okay.
But anyway, I'm glad that we're, while Kylo's doing this, I'm glad that we're, still questioning these areas, right? We're still saying, does this make sense? I'm pretty sure someone's gonna come out. Could be you, Omar, could be anybody, but I'm pretty sure at some point in time someone's gonna come up and say, wait a second, what if we do it this way? And it will make sense and it will make things. Remember, the standard is anti-DRY. Like every engineer out there will say, oh, don't repeat yourself, don't repeat yourself. And here we say, no, repeat yourself, because if it's an enterprise system, the abstraction becomes so much, it becomes much harder to maintain the system. It becomes very much harder to know where the system begins and where it ends, right? But again, man, I'm still open for suggestions.
Yeah. I like There is like a few things I still need to uh, kind of learn about in the standard, because you just mentioned a few things I didn't know, and
Mm,
we haven't finished actually a full project end to end just to see kind of everything
we're almost there.
yet. Yeah, almost there, but that's
Hmm.
good. That's good. Yeah.
Um, the, just be aware that, in the if you're building a standard compliant project, you're always fighting with this idea that there's this shortcut that you can take that will make the task get done in like a day, and yet you're doing the harder route that makes the task takes 20 days, 30 days, right? This is how do I explain this? This is a fundamental internal conversation or dialogue that every engineer will have with themselves. And it shows really the integrity of the person working on any project, right? Like, do you really, you can cut corners, you can get that API out the door in like 20 minutes and be hailed as a hero. However, you know for a fact that you delivered dog crap into the system. The scary part is that when you build an API that doesn't have a terminal, you know what I mean by that? Like the API that you're building, it's not the end of the road. Other systems will be built on top of it. Now it gets very, very much so interesting in terms of maintainability because there's no turning back. It's over. You already built a foundation that is not too solid, and then you're building other things on top of that foundation that is already not too solid. So any little change that you're making into this foundation will just make a ripple effect upstream, especially if you decide to change the contract or something crazy like that. Omar, up until this day, I'm still fighting people over not modifying code that already went to production. It's very hard to make people not do that. You know what I mean by that? Like you have an API that's already deployed to production. A lot of engineers be like, oh, we need to add this feature. Let me go modify that exact function that is already in production.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I don't know why people do that. Open for extension, close for modification. They weren't kidding. It's a very important principle. It's actually very, very important principle.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard people say something like, um, "Oh, in the 19.1 release, this feature worked, but 19.2 it doesn't anymore."
Oh,
Have you
of
ever heard that
course. Yeah.
before? Do you know why that happens? Every
It's
time you
a
hear someone
breaking
say that,
change. It's a breaking change.
exactly. Every time someone says that, know that some engineer somewhere, I don't care where in the ladder, or the levels of development they are, someone decided in their infinite wisdom to modify code that's already in production. I mean, my man, we have V1, V2, just create another version, and move on, Nope, nope. But it's a small fix, Omar. Can't we just go and mod? It's a small fix. What could it possibly break? Especially when there's no testing.
Nothing will break when you ship it. Yeah.
Look, there are groups, that are wild, like out there, like Hell's Angels and these biker gangs and all that. But I can tell you right now, there's no one more wild than someone who deploys code in production that hits about 20 million users, knowing that there is no test and they modify existing code that people already built on top of. That guy is more wild than anything out there.
True.
Because that guy is basically, you know what they're doing? They're just sitting there, but they're immediately touching, the daily of 20 million people, just like that, right? Which is freaking scary. Scary, scary.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Here's a question. Kandarb says, you said most of the applications start as monolithic with one service class because business logic is not complex as it grows. I think that might be the right time to switch. Yeah, if it gets complex and it's harder to maintain and you have multiple teams, by the way, microservices are just a reflection of your organization structure. So if the application gets so big, it's so hard to maintain, and you have critical path and you have other teams that are stakeholders into this, it probably makes more sense to break it apart. I worked in some places where there were 200 engineers on the same code base. right? It was nuts. It was a nightmare. Imagine 200 engineers touching the exact same main branch, and it was what do they call it? A mono repo, right? It's a big problem in our industry, something that we need to talk about. So he also says because if it's growing complex, only then it seems to make sense to switch to more complex structure. Yeah, I mean, just understand the trade-offs. Like if you're gonna go to microservices from a monolith, well, first of all, build your monolithic systems with a microservice mindset. That's what the standard is doing. Like, I'll take your screen for a second there, Kailu. But if you look at this structure, this is what I was talking to Omar about the other day. I was basically saying, if you're building this is one microservice, right, Omar? This here is one microservice, but each one of these can grow into their own microservice. Like you can literally take that exact code base and put an exposure and a dependency layer on it, and boom, you have your own microservice. So that exact same monolithic structure can also very much so turn into a bunch of microservices like this, talking to each other. And then you get to determine how many layers you want to merge together, right? So in here, if you have library and student, now it becomes a library. Watch this, library service, microservice. I say microservice to distinguish between the service that's an internal business logic piece, and here's a student microservice. And now you just need to end up building something like a school microservice, and that's the equivalent of an orchestration. So all of this work goes into here and here, and then you have your own dependency. See how this mimics this structure, the exact same structure. Look, this here is the exact same structure in here. It's just because you build standard compliance system, it's supporting that scale, right? You can literally take that code, just unplug it, and just put it in a microservice, put a dependency and exposure layer, and move on. This makes the folks that like FIM2 and serverless architecture, it makes them the happiest in the world, because people always want to be able to scale without any trouble. Just wait a little. I'll find the time and energy and the courage to write the standard architecture. But the core of these ideas are there. They're also recorded in many. I used to do like 50 people podcast, or a webcast where I just invite people inside Microsoft and Amazon and Facebook. They just come in and basically I start talking to them about how your architecture need to scale. It's really important. But don't just learn it to be a careerist. Learn it to build something interesting for people. Don't learn it to just go and be like, oh, give me some pennies. Go and build a real product with it. But that's a story, of course, for another day. Honestly, Omar, I want to throw away this entire idea of hard dependency. I think even talking to an interface is a hard dependency. I just want I just want things to send messages to each other, and that's it. That's Alan Kay's idea of object-oriented programming. But if you take it at the infrastructure level, it would be even more amazing. You know what I mean?
I actually am very interested to hear kind of your thoughts about this.
If
Uh,
you if you watch, Paul Wardy and I recorded a session called the Standard 3.0. I talked a lot about this. I talked about something called the Lake House, and the idea here was to have things floating in the phantom space, like it's in the void, and these things are just sending messages to each other. Look at us, like look at us today. Like, how do people communicate with each other, organizations and businesses and all that? There is no structure, really. It's just a bunch of nodes, and these nodes are firing messages to each other all day long, whether these messages are electronic or physical. It's just messages. Even at this very moment, you and I are communicating through messages, right? Packets of data going back and forth through the StreamYard thing.
yeah, but like when you say it, it's I understand it, but like when from kind of technical point of view, how will there need to be something for the standard that runs on the user machines to orchestrate all these messaging?
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know how to
like
solve that problem.
yeah, like an in-memory queue or service bus
Yep.
or
Yep.
something,
That's
right?
that's what the lake house is. There is
Mm,
the idea here is that you have this. Think of it, do you know when people used to throw bottles and put messages in front of it before any of us existed, like some
mhm,
500 years ago? It's a message that you're throwing in a lake or an ocean or whatever, and it ends up somewhere where someone, but it's a little bit more sophisticated than that.
mhm,
I don't know, they're just a bunch of ideas, but I think honestly, if I can, the standard 3.0 will allow people to change code in production mid-flight without any downtime.
mid-flight.
Mid-flight, like your application is
Yeah.
running and the module has been updated. Zero downtime.
That's actually, yeah. Like I haven't worked on this special problem, but kind of there. It's a popular
Mm,
problem in the kind of distributed systems world, right? Where all your
a
messages
very
that you send, not
uh,
a very, it's a popular, I would say.
mm.
It's like, but I don't think people like care to solve it a lot.
It is a very easy one to solve though. The only problem here is that you need a framework. You need someone like you and I and Kylo. We need to sit down and put in the time and effort and create that framework. It's zero cloud foreign system, so you're not really heavily dependent on any cloud system. You can run it locally or run it in the cloud. Um, I think the whole idea about the cloud in general is just, one way for businesses to force engineers into paying money for something that they can stand up locally on their machines. I want people to only use the cloud when they want scale, not because they have to, but because they want to scale. But you should be able to stand up your entire infrastructure on your local machine. Queues, service buses, everything. It
Mhm,
needs to be able to stand up locally. Look at a project called Lake U. Lake U, the whole idea of this project is to make your application send messages locally, right? And then I think we stopped at the point with Kin Swan and others. We basically stopped at the point where we wanted to simulate that. Because let me ask you this: how do you write even an acceptance test for a message queue that's coming through? This will blow your mind. Like assume that you want to resemble a queue message that's coming through into your system. How do you do
mhm.
that without integrating with Azure or any other cloud platform? You can't. You just can't.
Yeah,
You want
like
to look.
I saw examples where for the acceptance test they use an in-memory version of that, right? Like where you need to simulate throwing that message, but not using the cloud service itself, but an in-memory service, similar service, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Kondarb here says, yes, I have watched the standard videos. They are nice. I'm hoping to contribute to OSSS someday because trust me, it's a great initiative, especially if we can take it to every government schools for better management. Indian government schools are highly unorganized and still do a lot of paperwork. Oh, it's everywhere, my man. You'd be surprised. Not just in India, but he said, my mother is a government teacher, so I understand the challenge very well. Sorry for going a bit out of discussion. No, you're fine. Yeah, I need to sit down with maybe Greg and talk to him about how we can revive, kind of just get people more excited again about OSSS because I really want to finish this project. Omar, have you heard of OSSS? Have I ever talked to you about OSSS before?
Yeah, a little bit. The student
It's like a
management
schooling
system, or
system.
yeah, schooling
Yeah, it
system. Yeah.
but the schooling system, it has a very interesting license on it. It says for schools, if you're going to use this system, then whatever funds you're getting to use software, you may use that for free, but whatever funds you're getting, you need to give it back to the student, especially the financially disadvantaged. It's like an honor system. You're basically going and saying, I'm not going to sue you. I'm not going to go
Mhm,
after you in courts. But if you use the system, the only condition that we have is that you take that money, these funds that were allocated for software, and just give it to the people that, there's a lot of kids, they go to school because school will give free lunch. They're just poor. They don't have money,
yeah,
right?
that's very
So
nice.
imagine if you give them money and food, both. All right, Omar, it's your turn. I think
Okay.
it's your turn. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen to bring I don't know what version of the standard OSSS is on. We probably need AI to tell us where certain systems are in terms of versioning. How far behind are they standard way, but from a standard perspective. But yeah, I I see it.
Is my screen Oh, no. Is my screen visible to you or
Not yet.
permission?
Not yet.
Just a second, sorry.
No worries. Take your time.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Here we are.
Yeah. So let me get the latest.
I can hear your machine. Oh my God. Is
Can
this
you hear
your
it now?
is this your fan? Is this the fan of your machine? It's not too loud. I'm just humoring you, but I can hear
Yeah.
it's really going, you know.
I can't hear it myself.
Okay, that's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think Kailu, do you hear anything like a fan, like a processor, a fan on top of a processor?
I hear some machine running.
Yep, that's him. That's Omar's machine. All right.
But,
It's
yeah.
not too bad. I hope the people watching us on the stream can't hear. It's not too bad for them either. It's like an airplane jet. Do you hear it?
Airplane jets are too bad, actually. Not sure. Okay.
Yeah,
So there
Gregory
is some
said,
error
uh,
here.
go ahead. Mm. By the way, your screen
Yeah.
froze. I think you're sharing only one window or something like that.
I'm sharing the whole screen.
Okay, why is it not moving? Can you unshare and reshare?
Just a second. Yeah.
Gregory says a lot to do to bring it to current. I think he's talking about OSSS, yeah. And not a hard task, but a tedious one. OSSS, yeah. Yeah.
Can you see my screen now?
We can see your screen. I mean, we can
Okay.
see. No, now we just see your background, which is really cool and beautiful. That red thing, um, Lenovo ThinkPad X1. That's all we see right now.
Why don't you see my Visual Studio? Just gonna check again.
Are you on two monitors
Yeah,
by any chance?
but
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
can you see the data processing service class now?
Let's see. Yes, I think
Okay,
now we can see. Yep, let's do
okay,
it.
thanks. Let's see here. How come they all passed?
What? Look at well, you have three changes, so you need to kind of,
No, the three centers like are empty classes right now.
it's still not going to let you. It'll say you need to commit these existing changes before you poll.
Okay, no, I got it now. But
Okay.
like there's no conflict or anything. So let's see. This is data processing service tests.
Why
Um,
why your test explorer is showing like five tests? It's just one. That's weird.
it shows, I think,
All the
uh,
cases,
all the
but it
cases,
should
but they
only show
are
three.
actually, yeah, there are three.
It's weird. It's okay. Let's move
Yeah.
on.
All right.
It's
Uh-huh.
stripping out.
Okay. So we have the invalid query. This is the one we need to throw in the
Hmm.
validation, and we need to like get it inside this. Okay. So I just created a couple of files. So the AI data processing service, I have a validate query.
Mm-hmm.
And in here, I'll just throw a new. Is this? Yeah. So
There
we
should be
have
one. Wait,
without,
there should.
right?
Yeah, there should be one without. Let's see what happened here. So this has the the inner exception. Kailu, what's the inner exception for? I don't think we need it. I don't think we
Maybe
need
we
it.
Yeah,
gotta
it's
just copy
Not
paste
yet,
some.
at least, unless you have a dependency that, yeah, we're gonna need it later maybe, but not yet. And
Yeah,
also think
that one
yeah.
we're going, yeah.
I also think that this exception should be called invalid query
The,
data
yeah.
processing exception.
Okay. So let's see the models,
Yeah.
processing, data, exceptions, query, data. It's weird didn't change that. Okay.
Mm-mm. If you do control period, it should change it everywhere.
Yeah, I know. I sometimes it doesn't
Bugs
click.
out.
Yeah, it doesn't click. Okay, so invalid query data
Uh-huh.
processing exception. This is basically this is the only validation we need here, right? For the query.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is
Okay.
this your brother here on the stream? This is your brother, right? No?
Actually, he is my brother. I told him about you.
He's cool. I like him. We talked a little bit.
Yeah.
He's cool.
Okay. Okay, so let's go to the exception, data processing exception here.
Mm.
And we have just copied that piece here. So let's go, what did you call it? Null? What did you call it? Invalid query data processing exception.
Mm-hmm.
Invalid query data processing exception. And
And then we throw
throw
that as a data processing
data
validation
processing validation
exception.
exception.
That's right.
We give it the.
Type the whole name though.
Oh yeah.
Uh, too much corporate. Too much.
Okay.
He's saying he's your big brother.
He is this brother, yes.
Do you know that I have a twin brother?
Oh really?
Yeah, but we don't look the same.
I'm not identical.
Yeah, not identical. You couldn't even tell. We're very, very different, in and out, but I love him dearly, of course.
Of course. Okay, so
Okay, so this should
there
be
is this.
happy.
Yeah, let me just check something here. What's this complaining about? Try and catch.
Well, you're saying you're
Not
saying
okay.
return a string. You shouldn't be returning a string. You should be returning a data result.
Detailed data result, yeah. Copy paste.
Also on your returning data
Yeah.
function.
Okay. And return.
Ahmed says, I'm addicted now to the standard. Well, that makes me very happy. That makes me very, very happy. Omar, you're
Yeah.
originally Jordanian, no?
I'm from Palestine.
Palestinian,
Yeah.
Palestinian. I
Yeah.
know there is a lot of engineers in Jordan/Palestine in that area. A lot of software engineers. Some of my best friends even are from there. So if the standard makes it in there, I'm done. I don't have to do anything. I'm not gonna record any more videos. That's just gonna take care of itself.
Yeah. And there is a
Yeah,
lot of them, yes.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Nice.
Okay, my Visual Studio is kind of,
That's
as you
if you
said,
do a rebuild, it should take care of it, I think.
yeah.
If you do a rebuild. Because rebuild should clean and build, I think, as far as I remember. By the way, there are some systems when it gets complex enough, and you may or may not know this already, a rebuild will basically try to restructure the components that have changes in them. Because a rebuild in some systems meaning sitting there for about 16 hours until the system builds up. I'm not mentioning any names, I'm just saying. It's not a the system is big enough that it would take 16 hours to build. So
Last I heard is like 24 hours. I don't know.
so just for the people watching, if you think like Visual Studio is smarter than you can imagine, you know, this is especially for the people that go and say, oh, just toss away Visual Studio Enterprise and just use VS Code. You have no idea what this system is doing. Visual Studio has, I think, it's quite a bit. It's quite a bit of complexity in it. You can't just replace it with VS Code. I mean, VS Code to Visual Studio is like Notepad to Word. I should tweet that. That sounds great.
There is a failure here, but doesn't. Oh, okay, it shows now.
Just do a .NET test. That will tell you the actual story.
No, this like kind of weird one doesn't show the error,
Yeah.
but yeah. So here
Is
it
this a legit
says,
failure?
let's see, expected type of data processing validation exception, but I got invalid query data processing exception. Why I try? Oh, wait a second. I just need to try catch this. Here.
Mm-hmm.
Catch. I think we do async here. I forgot that.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Then try catch. Sorry, I need to change my screen. So
Okay.
here this is another one. Yes. It's too small.
Ahmed says I'm spreading it here. Going to have some LinkedIn content targeting local community. Yeah, absolutely. Please do. You know, Ahmed, I tried to translate it to Arabic. I need to get back to this project, but when I tried to translate it, you know, my dear friend Mabruk, he said you can't write in that style of Arabic. It's too old for people. People don't speak like that anymore. So I will try to modernize and get up with the speed with the way of the language. But I appreciate people that are. I mean, Ahmed, if you look at the Uzbek community, there is Elbek. He's basically he took the standard and he went wild. He went everywhere and taught it to everybody. I appreciate people that take this. By the way, Omar Gregory says
Mm.
take away the async. Take away the word async from your method. Not this one. The other
Oh,
one.
the other
Nope.
one here.
The other one.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I will test. Yeah,
sorry,
okay.
I was a million miles away. And
Yeah.
also try catch that this validate should go inside the try catch and
That's
your
right,
try
catch,
catch.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah. What happened to you? Is your brother making you nervous? Is that what it is?
No, it's all good. Okay, now it's working.
Okay, we're done. You made it.
Finally.
So my dear friend, tomorrow, just you owe me a test for handling validation exceptions, and then I do dependency exceptions, and then Kailu does service exceptions, and that's it. What do you think, Kailu? Is that fair? It's my turn
Yeah.
tomorrow. We can wrap this up before the end of the week, and then move on to building an orchestration service. Cool. We have a deal? Deal, no deal?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. And I know I started a war on social media. People are already giving me a hard time about it, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Here, VS Code to Visual Studio is like Notepad to Word. Let's see how many people this will trigger. This is gonna make me so angry. Anyway, thank you all so very much. I appreciate you all. I'll
Bye
talk to
bye.
you later. Thank you all for watching us. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.